On the eve of the piano competition, my right hand was accidentally scalded, causing me to miss out on the championship. Upon hearing this, Adrian rushed back overnight from out of town. Everyone said he loved me dearly. Only I knew that Adrian had sent someone to scald my hand just to please his first love. In the hospital, the man casually glanced at my gruesome wound and said lightly, "Does it hurt that much? Stop pretending." I clearly only instructed them to splash half a cup of water. Listening to the man's indifferent tone, I did not make a fuss. Instead, I silently planned my escape from the wedding a month later in my mind. In the quiet ward, Adrian lit up his phone screen once again. His eyes frequently glanced at the screen, as if waiting for a message from someone. Seeing the blood starting to backflow in the foretube, the man still appeared absent-minded. I finally could not help but remind him, "Adrian, the 4 bottle is empty." Adrian responded perfunctorily without giving me a glance. At that moment, a message notification sounded. Adrian's lips immediately curved into a smile, and his eyes softened considerably. His fingers quickly tapped on the phone screen. I turned my head away and stopped looking at him. Needless to say, Adrian was replying to Vivian's message. Only she could make the cold Adrian treat her with such gentleness. "By the way, after the infusion, go home by yourself," Adrian instructed me without even lifting his head. I turned to look out the window. It was drizzling lightly, but the wind was strong. Coincidentally, at that moment, Vivian posted on Facebook. It was a picture of a large transfer record. "Thanks for Adrian's 520,000. I was momentarily stunned. I suddenly recalled the 520 red envelope Adrian sent me on Valentine's Day. It was only after I pestered him for a long time that Adrian reluctantly agreed with a face full of impatience. The man's words still echoed in my ears. "Aria, when did you become so vain? It's just an insignificant holiday, do you need to be so calculating?" But to please Vivian, he was willing to spend 520,000 without batting an eye. I curled my fingers in confusion, as if this could alleviate the stinging pain in my heart. At that moment, Vivian entered with a bouquet of flowers. Upon seeing Vivian, Adrian stood up abruptly, his brows and eyes unable to conceal his delight. He walked over and took the flowers from the woman's hand. Vivian, as if no one else was present, took out the trophy hidden behind her. "The championship is mine," she said with immense pride. Adrian seemed even happier than her, hugging Vivian right in front of me. Watching this scene, I felt an immense irony. In the first 2 preliminary rounds, I won the championship each time, clearly distancing myself from Vivian, who placed second. Even the competition judges could not help but congratulate me in advance. "Miss Aria, no one here is your match." At that time, almost everyone believed that the championship was undoubtedly mine. But Vivian found Adrian. She cried pitifully, clutching the man's sleeve. Vivian did not even say anything. Adrian could not bear it. He felt extremely distressed and immediately sent someone to scald my right hand. Heaven knows how heartbroken I was when calling the staff. "Miss Aria, are you voluntarily withdrawing from the competition?" the staff asked incredulously. I let the tears flow into my mouth, suppressing waves of heartache. "Yes, I am voluntarily withdrawing." Looking at the trophy that should have been mine, I slowly averted my gaze. I could lose to anyone, but not to Vivian. Adrian did not know that Vivian was the culprit behind my father's death. 10 years ago, to save Vivian who had fallen into the water, my father ignored the warnings and jumped into the lake without hesitation, rescuing her. But the first thing Vivian did upon reaching shore was not to thank my father. Instead, she insisted he took advantage of being underwater to touch my pants. "He's a lunatic." As a teacher, my father could not bear the humiliation. Amid the crowd's condemnation, he chose to commit suicide. After the 2 finished their affectionate moment, Vivian finally noticed me. She proactively handed me her trophy, smiling to comfort me. "Sister Aria, don't be too sad. The championship isn't something anyone can get just because they want it. You've touched the trophy, so that counts as being a champion." Looking at the woman's understanding face, I could not suppress the anger in my heart. I could not help but sneer. You can be so at ease with stolen goods. As the words fell, Adrian frowned and immediately shielded Vivian behind him, his face darkening menacingly. Seeing this, Vivian's eyes filled with more tears, on the verge of falling, looking utterly pitiful. Arya, did the infusion damage your brain? Vivian came to comfort you. Not to be your punching bag. Vivian sobbed softly, reaching out to tug at the man's sleeve. Don't say that. If it weren't for Sister Arya's hand injury. Adrian did not buy it. He glanced at me with annoyance in his eyes. You don't need to speak for her. No skill means no skill. Just because she won a few awards, she really thinks she's better than Vivian. The man's particularly harsh words left me slightly stunned. When Adrian and I first confirmed our relationship, he was not yet the wealthy Adrian. He noticed my love for the piano and used all his savings to buy me one. I will always remember that day. Adrian stood in the cramped rental room, with an out-of-place piano behind him. He hid his hands, frostbitten from endless part-time jobs, behind his back. He said to me, "Congratulations, Miss Arya, on acquiring the first piano in your life." I cried fiercely, unable to utter a complete sentence for a while. I clearly have no talent in this area. Yet Adrian gently hugged me and said in my ear, "No, Arya. In my heart, you are the greatest pianist." Thanks to Adrian's repeated encouragement, I did not give up on my dream. But people always change. Just like the 31-year-old Adrian. He would not be like the 22-year-old Adrian, who favored me unconditionally in everything. When Adrian left the ward, the door slammed loudly. He even threw a harsh warning at me, "Arya, this is my last warning. If you make Vivian unhappy again, I won't go through with next month's wedding." Adrian was accustomed to using marriage as a threat against me. From beginning to end, he believed I could not leave him. That might have been true before. But now, I opened my phone and bought a ticket abroad for a month later. And that day was precisely the date of my wedding with Adrian. After the infusion, the clock pointed to 4 a.m. Without my phone, I had to walk home alone. As dawn broke, I opened the door. Adrian, with an apron around his waist, was cooking in the kitchen. The cold home finally had some warmth. Adrian looked up at me. Seeming to notice my drenched hair and disheveled clothes, a rare flash of guilt appeared in the man's eyes. He rubbed his forehead as if in pain and walked up to me. "It was wrong of me to leave you this time. I ordered takeout, eat some." As if to break the ice, Adrian's tone softened considerably. I glanced at the simple takeout on the table, feeling no appetite. There was even a fried egg in the lunchbox. After so many years, Adrian could not even remember my allergy to eggs. Unintentionally, I saw several lunch boxes on the kitchen counter, vegetables, meat dishes, even freshly cut fruit. There was even a pot of pork rib soup stewing on the stove. Perhaps noticing my gaze, the man felt guilty for a moment and shifted his body awkwardly, trying to block my view. He explained, "You know, Vivian is exhausted from learning piano. I can't just ignore it." Saying this, Adrian spread his hands, as if he truly had no choice. In the past, I would have made a scene. But now, a sense of helplessness gradually spread in my heart. A year ago, when Adrian was on a business trip in another province, he accidentally lost his wallet. It was Vivian who helped him. From then on, Adrian always said, if it weren't for Vivian, I wouldn't know what to do. No matter what trouble Vivian encountered, Adrian would always stand behind her without hesitation. Whenever I expressed my dissatisfaction, Adrian would always be very impatient. "Arya, Vivian is not an outsider, I've already treated her as my own sister." Thinking of this, I indifferently pushed the man away and said, "She should indeed nourish herself well." Upon hearing this, Adrian looked at me in surprise, as if my current demeanor was strangely unfamiliar to him. But he did not ask more, instead pulling out a small, exquisite jewelry box from his pocket. I recognized it at a glance. It was the diamond necklace I had asked Adrian for months ago. Even though I mentioned it more than once, Adrian still did not fulfill my request. Yet this time Adrian wanted to give it to me. I watched as Adrian opened the box. The diamond necklace was as brilliant as I had seen in the jewelry store. Yet I could not feel happy at all. Because I had seen an identical one around Vivian's neck. I still remembered her triumphant look. "You mean this necklace?" I just mentioned it to Adrian, and who knew it would be in my hands the next day. The thing I longed for, Vivian obtained effortlessly. In an instant, I pushed Adrian away in disgust and walked to the bedroom. This action angered him. The man snapped the box shut, his brows tinged with anger. "Arya, what do you mean? The food is right in front of you, and you don't eat it, fine. You don't even glance at the necklace I bought. Are you still throwing a tantrum over that incident?" As for that incident, both Adrian and I knew it well. Seeing my indifferent appearance, Adrian was clearly angrier. His chest heaved violently, like a raging lion. He grabbed the nearby photo frame and smashed it hard on the ground. The glass frame shattered instantly. "Arya, you're really out of control now." I did not speak, but looked at the photo on the ground. It was my first photo with Adrian. To show its importance, I specially framed it. I still remember what Adrian said to me that time. "Arya, I won't change my heart. So you can't leave me either, we have to be together forever." At that time, I was too naive and easily believed his words. So I smiled and teased him, "What if you change your heart?" Adrian listened and actually thought about it seriously. Finally, he said firmly, "Then you should never forgive me. No matter how pitifully I beg you to turn back then. Arya, remember this. Never turn back." The faces of young Adrian and adult Adrian gradually overlapped. My nose tingled, and I tried hard to suppress the urge to pick up the frame. In the end, Adrian and I parted on bad terms. The reason this argument ended was still because the time to deliver food to Vivian was approaching. After Adrian slammed the door and left in a hurry, the room became quiet again. I looked at the old piano without hesitating any longer. I picked up a hammer and smashed it hard. After the piano was unrecognizable, I called the recycling service. The recycling station staff was shocked by the smashed piano. He asked me, "Do you really want to sell it?" I nodded calmly, "It's just a pile of insignificant garbage." Half a month passed in a row. The wedding day was getting closer. But Adrian seemed to have forgotten me, unwilling to step through the door. The person who always complained about being too busy with work in front of me was willing to accompany Vivian on a world tour. I learned all this from Vivian's Facebook. During this time, her Facebook updates were frequent, mostly photos with Adrian. Seeing the man's smiling face, I could not help but laugh inwardly. You know, I had not seen Adrian's smiling face for a long time. In front of me, he always kept a stern face, showing no warmth. Many friends learned about this and asked me one after another, "What is Adrian's relationship with that woman?" I was silent for a moment and said, "Just ordinary friends." "Are you still getting married?" I smiled. "Yes, you must come on the wedding day." Hearing my unremarkable tone, almost everyone concluded that I loved Adrian dearly and would still choose to marry him even after knowing about his affair. Finally, 3 days before the wedding, Adrian returned. He brought back various gifts, large and small, almost filling the entire room. Adrian rubbed my head and said satisfiedly, "If you could always be as obedient as now, how great that would be." I forced myself to endure the nausea and did not dodge the man's touch. It was this hand that had held Vivian's countless times. I found it dirty. He handed me a card and said in a condescending tone, "You can pick the wedding ring. Vivian is busy with a competition lately, I have to accompany her." Seeming afraid I would throw another tantrum, Adrian warned me first, "This competition is very important to Vivian. Don't be unreasonable." To the man's surprise, I just nodded lightly. Adrian did not pay much attention to my abnormality. He just thought I had become obedient and left in a great mood. Thus, Adrian comfortably accompanied Vivian for 3 days. On the wedding day, before going on stage, the makeup artist combed my hair one last time. I paid attention to the MC's voice in the hall until I heard, "Let us welcome the bride." The remaining words were interrupted by an urgent phone ring. Under everyone's gaze, Adrian answered the call in panic. From the other end came Vivian's voice with a cry, "Adrian, the goldfish you bought me is belly up. Is it about to die?" The phone was on speaker, and almost everyone could hear. Adrian's face showed a struggle and hesitation. I watched him from behind the distant curtain. Finally, Adrian firmly raised his hand. "Sorry, the wedding is paused. It will resume in about 30 minutes. The audience erupted in uproar. Adrian pushed the door open without hesitation and left. This time, I did not hesitate either. I tore off the veil, took off the wedding dress, and under the astonished gazes of the crowd, got into a taxi and left. Before boarding the plane, exactly 30 minutes had passed. Adrian started bombarding me with calls. Finding it annoying, I simply turned off my phone early. I originally thought I would never hear about Adrian again. But just as I sat down, nearby passengers whispered, "Did the bride really run away? How could it be fake?" I heard Adrian is almost driven mad. A wedding venue worth tens of millions, ruined just like that. Upon hearing this, I took out earplugs and put them on, falling into a drowsy sleep. After getting off the plane, there were hundreds of missed calls and messages on my phone. Coincidentally, another call came in at that moment. Dragging my suitcase, I hesitated for a while but still answered Adrian's last call. Adrian seemed very angry, his words aggressive. "Aria, where did you go? Are you crazy? Marriage is a serious matter, not a place for you to fool around." After listening, I sneered. I said, "Since you know marriage is a big deal, you still resolutely went to accompany Vivian." Adrian, who was the one fooling around? After saying this, Adrian on the other end was speechless for a moment. He seemed not to expect that I, who always obeyed him, could retort. Suddenly, a coquettish female voice came from the other end into my ear. "Adrian, why aren't you here yet? The sweet and sour pork ribs are about to burn." Adrian reacted and soothed, "Right away." Then he lowered his voice and instructed me with a headache, "I don't care where you went. As long as you come back in a week, the wedding will proceed as usual." He was as confident as ever. Taking advantage of neither of us speaking again, Adrian added, "Don't misunderstand. Vivian won another championship, I'm just celebrating with her." Listening to the subtle pride in the man's tone, I tugged at my lip corner without saying another word and hung up. Over these years, what Adrian left me seemed to be only the faint scar on my right hand. But I no longer cared. To quickly adapt to life here. I worked part-time while studying piano. During that time, even the calluses on my fingertips seemed to thicken. After 7 consecutive days of overload, I finally fainted in the cafe. When I woke up again, a tall figure stood by the bed. I propped myself up, trying to identify him. The person suddenly turned around. A particularly familiar face. The man smiled, his charm undiminished from before. "Aria, long time no see." In an instant, the joy of reunion burst forth. "Ethan?" Ethan nodded, his smile deepening. In a foreign land, I unexpectedly met a close friend from my youth. Unlike Adrian, who started from scratch, Ethan was born with a silver spoon. Yet his appearance and abilities were exceptionally outstanding. When we first entered high school, Ethan inexplicably asked me, "If I want to study abroad, would you agree?" At that time, my heart and eyes were full of Adrian. Naturally, I answered, "Of course I agree." It was that day that Ethan boarded the plane to go abroad. In these years, he had been out of touch. I could only hear from others. I heard Ethan has become a famous lawyer now. Wow, that's amazing. From beginning to end, Ethan was an admirable figure. My thoughts were in chaos when Ethan reached out and unhesitatingly touched my forehead. My heartbeat slowed half a beat. I could not bother to dodge. "How do you take care of yourself?" "Fever at 39 degrees and still pushing to work." I smiled embarrassedly, thinking Ethan was still as mature as before. At that moment, the phone rang. I looked at the phone, it was an unknown number. So I answered without caution. Who knew it would be a barrage of scolding? Arya, do you want to die? Do you know how long I've been waiting for you at the airport? Listening to the man's frantic voice, I inexplicably felt relieved. You know, Adrian used to treat me the same way. He often verbally agreed perfunctorily, then let's go watch a movie tomorrow. But he always left me just before the show started, casually saying, Vivian needs me for something, wait for me, I'll be back soon. Leaving me waiting foolishly until dark. All this was just because of Vivian's coquettish remark. Whenever I asked for an explanation, Adrian would raise his eyebrow, once again showing that indifferent attitude, casually saying, Arya, you need to learn to be more sensible. Vivian is so young, let her have her way. After all, young girls like to be put first. But he seemed to have forgotten the promise he once made to me. Arya, in my heart, you will always be first. In the midst of my daze, Ethan, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke. Your hair is messy, do you need me to fix it for you? The moderate voice reached Adrian's ears, eliciting a more intense reaction from the man. He yelled at me, Arya. Who are you with? Who allowed you to mix with other men? I smiled apologetically at Ethan. Compared to Adrian's frenzy, Ethan just nodded reservedly and politely, indicating understanding. I became increasingly impatient, suppressing the urge to hang up. Adrian, don't threaten me with marriage anymore. I have no intention of marrying you now. Perhaps my tone was too serious. Adrian's tone weakened. He still did not want to believe it, repeatedly questioning me, what joke are you making? But my patience had been completely exhausted. I frowned and said disgustedly, can you not be like an unshakable piece of gum? I'm almost sick of you. The last sentence came from the heart. Then, I no longer cared about Adrian's reaction and hung up decisively. Ethan, however, seemed in a great mood. He asked casually, quarreled with your boyfriend? I subconsciously frowned and retorted, we broke up long ago. Ethan said no more. After 2 days of rest, I wholeheartedly immersed myself in piano studies again. A broader world made me feel my own inadequacies more. Ethan's companionship gradually filled my loneliness. He was a very gentle and romantic person, often handing me a bouquet of flowers, sometimes gypsophila, sometimes jasmine. I gradually forgot Adrian's existence. Until 3 days later, when I just returned, I saw Adrian waiting at the door. After only half a month, Adrian had become thinner. His chin had blue stubble, and his usually neat shirt looked disheveled. The moment his gaze met mine, Adrian stood up abruptly. He could not help but complain, Arya, you made me wait so long. The man's words were indeed true. After all, the old me never wanted to make Adrian wait more than 5 minutes. I always thought he was busy, so I cherished his time immensely. Until one time, I saw a Facebook post from Vivian. Although the photo only showed the man's back, I recognized it at a glance. Vivian smugly captioned, hee hee, today I made Adrian wait 2 hours more. But he still didn't get angry, he loves me so much. My vision blurred slightly, tears dripping onto the phone screen. You know, Adrian once flew into a rage because he waited 3 minutes more for me. People like you with no sense of time, no one will indulge you. With myriad thoughts, I came back to reality and showed no good face to Adrian. Carrying a bunch of daily necessities, I walked straight past the man, reached the door, and took out the key. Adrian saw and extended his hand. It's so heavy, let me help you. He said, as if we were still in love as before. But I dodged the man's hand, looked up seriously, and said to him, Adrian, I don't need you anymore. So please leave my home. Adrian was stunned, taking a long time to recover. After a while, he lowered his hand with an ugly expression. What nonsense are you saying? I came all the way to the UK for you. If you still mind my relationship with Vivian, I can promise you. I'll keep my distance from her in the future. If it were the 18-year-old Arya, she would believe him without thinking. But now standing before Adrian was the 29-year-old Aria. I no longer needed Adrian's flimsy promise. Just as Adrian and I were at a stalemate, Ethan suddenly appeared. Seeing me wearing only a thin jacket, he took off his coat and draped it over my shoulders. "You're disobedient again. Always wearing so little." Ethan looked at me, his tone complaining, but his eyes full of smiles. I instantly understood his intention. I naturally hooked my arm around Ethan's and intimately leaned on his shoulder. "Why are you back so late? I've been waiting for you for so long." Almost instantly, Adrian's anger was fully ignited. He gripped my wrist, his lip curve cold and hard. "Aria, we haven't broken up yet," Adrian reminded me. I frowned and shook off his hand forcefully. "From the moment you left for Vivian, we had no relationship anymore." Ethan shielded me in front, blocking me completely. I looked at his broad back, feeling vaguely dazed. When Ethan had not gone abroad, he often stood in front of me like this. At that time I was thin and small, often bullied by children. It was Ethan who protected me time and again. My heart beat faster and faster, as if long-buried emotions suddenly burst forth. Everything poured out. Ethan's voice came from above. "I think Adrian shouldn't be interested in someone else's girlfriend." Upon hearing this, Adrian's face changed repeatedly. The vein on his forehead throbbed slightly. I knew this was a sign of Adrian's extreme anger. He lowered his voice, bypassing Ethan, looking straight at me. His tone contained a warning. "Aria, come here." Saying this, Adrian extended his hand toward me. This was the first time I so detested Adrian's confident demeanor. I stepped back and slowly shook my head. "You should have given up on this idea long ago." Ethan noticed my rejection and simply stopped wasting words with Adrian. Instead, he held my hand tightly, opened the door, and walked in. Seeing Adrian about to follow, I closed the door first. With a bang, Adrian was shut out. I did not miss the flash of shock in the man's eyes. He unwillingly pounded the door, shouting my name loudly. But I pretended not to hear. It seemed from that day, the relationship between Ethan and me underwent a subtle change. But neither of us chose to break through this paper window. Because Ethan picked me up every day, even the friends at the piano studio knew him. They often teased me, "You should accept him." Whenever I heard such words, I would smile without speaking. Because at the moment, I had more important things to do. The injustice to my father had almost become an ineradicable thorn in my heart. Fortunately, things finally turned around. I finally contacted the participant who jumped into the lake with my father to save someone that year. I thought it was time to go back. When I told Ethan my plan, he looked at me seriously for a second and immediately decided to return to the country with me. I was somewhat astonished by the man's decisiveness. You know, Ethan was thriving in the UK legal circle. He had no reason to choose to return. Ethan saw my hesitation to speak. "Don't you understand yet?" Saying this, Ethan slowly held my hand. His gentle gaze became even more firm. "I should be by your side accompanying you. Aria, please allow me to witness your success. Not to help me succeed, but to witness my success." Only I could understand how well Ethan knew me from this sentence. After returning to the country, I collected evidence day and night. Evidence from 4 or 5 years ago was not easy to gather. But I gritted my teeth and persisted. Because as soon as I closed my eyes, my father's pale face after death would appear before me. The night before the court hearing, Vivian, whom I had not seen for a long time, came to me. She was still as fragile as before, but her attire was far less glamorous than before. Her eyes seemed filled with endless fatigue and hatred. Upon seeing me, Vivian knelt down with a thud, grabbing my pant leg and begging. Looking at the tears on the woman's face, I indifferently moved my foot away. Adrian came over at that moment. Seeing the man's helpless expression, I guessed he already knew about the matter between Vivian and me. This time, he did not give Vivian an extra glance. Adrian forced a smile uglier than crying. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something to me. but Vivian spoke first. "Sister Arya, please spare me for the sake of the child I'm carrying from brother Adrian." She said it particularly touchingly. I knew she did not want to bear this crime. Upon hearing this, Adrian reacted more intensely than Vivian. He kicked Vivian over, no longer showing his former tenderness. "If you talk nonsense in front of Arya again, I won't spare you." Adrian lowered his voice, his eyes bloodshot, threatening Vivian. Looking at Vivian clutching her stomach, lying on the ground in painful wails, I did not want to investigate whether she really had a child with Adrian. Coincidentally, Ethan's car drove over. He rolled down the window and said, "Get in quickly. You clearly said we were going to watch a movie today." I smiled and quickly got into the car. Adrian blocked the closing window, waving the movie tickets in his hand. He said uneasily to me, "Do you remember the movie you wanted to see before? I booked the whole theater today, just you and me." My gaze fell on those 2 tickets. The roles between Adrian and me had reversed. In the past, I would always buy 2 tickets and rush excitedly to Adrian. "Let's go watch a movie every weekend." At such times, Adrian would always sit in his office chair, glancing over me cursorily, scolding dissatisfiedly, "You should be more sensible. I have such a big company to manage, where do I have time to fool around with you?" So I held Ethan's hand, smiling brightly. "No need, I already have someone to accompany me." Adrian could not even maintain surface calm. But he still refused to give up. "Are you free tomorrow then? Coco misses you lately and won't even eat its favorite freeze-dried food." I paused. Coco was the little dog Adrian and I raised together. But no matter how I tried to please it, it always ignored me. Yet it always liked to circle around Vivian. I thought and shook my head. "Coco is yours." I hate raising ungrateful dogs the most. The implied meaning was understood by Adrian. His legs weakened, nearly falling to the ground, his face growing paler. I patted Ethan, urging, "Drive quickly." After driving far, I could still see Adrian's figure in the rearview mirror. He stood there like a statue. In the courtroom, when the judge finally announced the verdict, I felt as if a heavy burden was lifted, experiencing unprecedented relief. Vivian was sentenced to prison. This time, no matter how pitifully she cried, no one was moved by her anymore. Just as I exited the courtroom, I bumped into Adrian. He held a large bouquet of roses. The fiery red roses almost engulfed the man, attracting onlookers. He took out a diamond ring, knelt on one knee. "Arya, will you marry me?" Looking at the man's violently trembling hands, I inexplicably wanted to laugh. Once upon a time, this was exactly like the proposal scene I fantasized about. Alas, the timing was wrong. No matter how Adrian tried to make up, it was all in vain. Voices of envy came from the crowd. "She's so lucky." This kind of proposal, few women would refuse. Adrian obviously heard these words. He became visibly more panicked, his eyes full of imperceptible pleas. I thought, the best way to revenge someone is to let him experience the pain he once inflicted. So, under the astonished gazes of the crowd, I knocked over the roses. The roses smashed hard on the ground, the originally beautiful petals falling off. I showed Adrian the sparkling ring on my hand. "You have no chance, I'm already engaged." Adrian seemed to lose all strength, his knees weakening as he knelt before me. "Arya, as long as you don't leave me, I'll do anything you want. How can I let go of over a decade of feelings?" Adrian's eyes were red, a vulnerability I had never seen. I shook my head firmly and slowly, retorting, "No, you can. From the first time you favored Vivian, you could let go." Ethan came over, holding my coat. I linked my arm with his, no longer heeding the pleas from behind, and left the bustling crowd without looking back. The day Arya left, it was the first time Adrian saw her back so resolute. He suddenly woke up. His mind instantly filled with many scenes, all about Arya. But all were her disappointed and hurt expressions. Arya's departure was not impulsive but a deliberate decision after accumulating enough disappointment. During that time, Adrian hid decadently at home. No matter who persuaded him, he refused to leave. Every night, he would wake up inexplicably. In the dream, Aria's face was full of tear stains. She stood alone, her figure thin and small. She asked Adrian why he left her time and again. Adrian panicked. He wanted to hug Aria, comfort her properly, and tell her, "It's not like that. I love no one but you." But every time he took a step, Aria would step back. She stubbornly repeated Vivian's name. The prominent scar on the back of her hand became the strongest evidence. Adrian looked at that scar, his heart aching more than anyone's. It was like enduring a slow and cruel lingering death. After leaving Adrian, Aria seemed to be doing well. Relying on her outstanding abilities, Aria's fame in the piano world grew. When mentioning Aria, people would always click their tongues in admiration. At such times, Adrian's heart would always surge with a strange sense of pride. But what followed was unprecedented regret. He longed day after day to see Aria again. Until one day, while crossing the road, Adrian met a little girl. She chattered non-stop, her eyes resembling Aria's. As if by telepathy, Adrian looked beside the little girl. The figure he longed for day and night intruded into his view without warning. The man's eyes reddened instantly, not daring to move a step. Aria glanced at him, her expression calm. It was like looking at a stranger. They did not stay long before getting into the private car. The little girl's cheerful voice still echoed in his ears. "Daddy is sneaking a kiss on Mommy again," Adrian fantasized. If there had been no Vivian, would everything he saw today have happened to him instead?